R11 FMU.
Well, good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I'm David Finn. I'm the current fire behavior specialist for the province of Alberta. Although for the last 7 years, since 2007, I've been responsible for the prescribed fire program in the Rocky Mountain House Clearwater Forest area. And it's on that authority that I speak to you this morning. Just as some brief introduction, recently I was at the Forest History Association meeting. And a room full of folks in my quarter century with the department have been my supervisors and mentors and work associates, and really great to see them. And I see a lot of the same, I can say a lot the same for the folks, for most of the folks I see in this room, folks I've known over the years. Some I've worked with, some at arm's length, and some directly. Some old faces, mentors and friends, and of course new faces. And for those that we don't know each other, I'm willing to bet there's no more than a single degree of separation in that we all know the same folks together. It's a small community. It is my real privilege and honor to speak to you on the prescribed fire program in the R11 Forest Management Unit, something I've invested a lot of my working career in and a lot of focus and energy. So my talk will be on four main points. What is prescribed fire use? The R11 Forest Management Unit, the Forest Management Plan that permits us to embark on our prescribed fire program, and then the actual prescribed fire use in the R11 Forest Management Unit. Starting out, any talk on prescribed fire has to involve sort of a history and what brought us to where we are today. The slide behind you, or the slide behind me here, shows a shot from the Mountain Legacy photo series, which was a photography project commissioned by the Canadian government at the turn of the 19th century. Into the 20th century to send surveyors out with old glass plate and heavy wooden cameras where they went up onto mountaintops all up and down the mountains of western Alberta into British Columbia and take panoramic mountain photographs and then use surveying techniques to start mapping out the up until that point really uncharted West Country. And these photos were discovered recently, and very high quality photographs. And then the Mountain Legacy Project has sent photographers back out to the same mountain peaks to reshoot the photographs. The photo that we have here, and they make for us a great time-lapse photography of about 100 years spread. The photo here is down in southern Alberta. The mountain in the back left-hand corner is Chief Mountain, and you can see the amount of prairie and rangeland that's evident. And then the same photo taken in 2007, the ingress of forest growth is plainly evident. This in and of itself is not really a bad thing. Forests grow, they die, they burn, they grow again. And so these two photos represent two different states of a forest. Neither is right, neither is wrong. It's just a point in the forest life, the way we all have our point at being children and then adults and as we move through our lives. But what has come to pass what has come to pass in that ensuing century of time is the exclusion of fire from our landscape in many cases. Going back almost 2 centuries now in Canadian history, in Western Canada's history, starting out in the 1830s, is the imposition of fire restriction. Back then there was no real fire suppression capacity, but there was the certainly the political aspect of it, with threats of fines or jail time for those who are irresponsible with fire. Starting in the 1960s, our fire suppression capacity took a big jump forward with the involvement of aircraft in fire suppression and helicopters in the air tanker program. And now Alberta boasts one of the best fire suppression capacities in Canada and in the world. The outcome of all this fire suppression, though, is that we've ended up creating inadvertently, in our attempts to protect the forest resource for forest industry, is an aging forest that is pretty much continuous over a very large part of Alberta. And I like to use the analogy of imagining a community of people where everybody is in their 80s, 70s and 80 years old. No children, no young adults, just a bunch of senior citizens. And we do have communities like that, Vancouver, in Vancouver Island down in Arizona, retirement communities. But they are really artificial communities, and they don't have a lot of, population continuity to them. So some prescribed fire use. Some of the tools that we can do with prescribed fire, and just a definition, when we talk about prescribed fire, it's a deliberate fire, one that we set ourselves under conditions of our own planning and choosing. And or in fire use, moving ahead into a place in the R11 area where we can let fire reside on the landscape. Natural ignitions, lightning ignitions, or perhaps in some cases even man-caused ignitions that could be allowed to burn without receiving the full weight of Alberta's suppression capacity. That's not to say that they're not managed. They are closely observed and managed possibly with aerial ignition or just some steering action. In most cases, these fires would be at lower hazard indices and or in the shoulder seasons later in the fall where they pose less of a threat to becoming really large uncontained wildfires. Another aspect is that prescribed fire gives us the opportunity to improve fire and fuel management planning. Rather than just being the occurrence or the event that would just foster the dispatch of air tankers and suppression resources, we're starting to recognize that wildfire and fire on the landscape is an integral part of the life of a forest, the cycle of a forest, and that it can become a tool in our toolbox and not just an event to be feared or dreaded by forestry planners and managers. Fire provides tremendous opportunities for ecological management. Being an entity on the landscape for tens of thousands of years, well, since the glaciers left, and of course anywhere where there is forest, there is fire. That goes back millions of years. All of our life forms, our plants, our animals, have all developed strategies to deal with fire. You're all familiar with the serotiny of pine cones, with the clumping nature of black spruce. There's an endless variety of strategies that plants and animals have evolved to deal with the occurrence of fire. And it's because fire happens over and over and over for so many times for so long that they've come to deal with it. And recently now, possibly some alternate silvicultural systems from what we maybe generally have used, rather than just the mechanical, but some options for fire as a silvicultural system. Certainly nothing new in forestry, I realize that, but it's always been the sticking point of the liability and responsibility if something goes wrong with the fire. So where is the R11 unit? Here in the province of Alberta. I've shown the Edmonton and Calgary for reference, and then R11 unit is the polygon there on the lower left side, and then expanded up there. It's a pretty mountainous bit of terrain there, from upper foothills up into full alpine territory. Abraham Lake is the water body evident in the middle of it, and the community there is Nordegg, again on the upper northeast side, and then down to the Yaha Timber Ranch at the extreme south end, just for reference there. In the Rocky Mountain House area there are 6 forest management units, and R11 is just one of them. We saw earlier a presentation on Alberta's natural subregions, and this is a snapshot or an expansion of that, and this is R11 depicted with its natural subregions. The R11 unit is home to 5 natural subregions, the lower and upper foothills, although lower foothills is just a fraction of 1%. But the upper foothills, the montane, the subalpine, and then the alpine, being really just basically rock. Most of it is subalpine at about almost 50%, and then coming in next, alpine at 35%, and then upper foothills. Lower foothills and montane are under 10% of the total. So the R11 Forest Management Plan was commissioned in 2005, starting and ratified in 2007. And the plan was to address the fact that the R11 unit really had no commercialized disturbance mechanism in place. There was no forest management agreements. There was really no timber licenses. It was just essentially a land base with no disturbance on it. It wasn't administered under Alberta Parks. It was administered by Alberta Forestry, and the need for a management plan to address that was very apparent. And some basic tenets were given to the management team that the need to reduce the threat of large-scale forest fires because of the continuity of mature forest in that area. At the time that the plan was underway, the mountain pine beetle was a very growing concern all up and down the western side of Alberta, and the mandate to reduce the mountain pine beetle threat was one of the specifications. The need to maintain grizzly and elk populations, to try and diversify stand age and stand age and composition to provide a variety of habitat as opposed to one represented by continuous mature forest. To maintain riparian habitat along the major creeks and rivers, and then also to maintain or improve habitat for specified endangered species, of which quite a list came out. In building the plan, the department used a SHREC process, which is actively engaging interested stakeholders. And of the stakeholders that were queried, there's some 70 different identified stakeholders I believe that were petitioned, and they boiled them down to about 18, and each of those stakeholder groups were solicited to put a representative forward to the final process. The Alberta government put down some identified values that they had to see happen. There's some basic tenets that had to happen. But in most cases, the development of the plan was left over for the stakeholders to build the plan. And over a 2 or 3 day period, the stakeholder representatives and government representatives sequestered themselves at the Goldeye Lodge west of Nordegg and basically built a plan. The comments back later was that not only were the government expectations met, but they were more stringent. The plan was more stringent and more encompassing than even what the government would have come from. And to achieve that with such a diverse group of stakeholders was a real achievement. We have since used the SHREC process in other applications in FireSmart in the Clearwater area, and it meets with good success. It's really actively engaging your audience and getting their input, not just presenting the plan forward to them. In quick terms, the R11 plan is built around a series of what they call VOITs, which are values and objectives, indicators and targets. And of those, some 70 VOITs were prepared, and the number one VOIT there was that the disturbance would be greater than 600 hectares, up to 10,000 hectares in size. and that prescribed fire was going to be the main mechanism to drive the natural range of variation in that. From the Alberta Fire Regime Study done by Teamstra and Rajot and Wang, it was derived that there was a disturbance rate of about 2,800 hectares a year, and splitting that in half to account for wildfire put a target of prescribed fire of about 1,400 hectares a year for the R11 unit. So for a total of amortized over a number of years, about almost 3,000 hectares a year was the target for prescribed fire. From that plan, a 50-year burn sequence map was prepared, and the different burn polygons are shown on the map, but there's also recognizing the adjacency with forest management agreements. Along the eastern edge of the R11 unit, the disturbance plan was set aside for mechanical only. So timber harvest, commercial timber harvest would be provided for in the R11 unit. And then in some other areas it was a mix of either mechanical through fire smart treatments or through harvest and fire. And then in the interior parts of R11 it was fire only. Planning. Any burn plan has incessant and ongoing planning. It seems like 100 hours of planning for every hour that you might be engaged in burning. And the planning would start in the office environment over maps and weather charts and historical weather and wildlife concerns and dealing with other professionals in the field. But then at some point it has to move out to the public and out to the stakeholders. In these meetings we try and hold them in the environment where the burn is going to happen. This particular photo, the last one, is for the Upper Saskatchewan prescribed burn, meeting with First Nations elders right out at the burn site and going for a tour through the burn area with them and just showing them where the burn was going to happen. And then getting closer to burn day on another burn down by Yahatinda Ranch. Forestry staff went out on horseback patrol to meet and talk to the people out in the field, not just posters or newspaper or media, but going out on horseback just to meet and talk to the folks that would be affected by the burn. We've always strived to have good engagement with the media, with the newspaper and television, giving them preferential exposure to the burns, and it's worked very well for us in building public rapport on the program. Before we set the match there, in the interest of science, we send vegetation monitoring crews out within 2 years of the burn to do vegetation monitoring plots where they will take a whole host of measurements to record the site for the condition that it's in prior to the burn. So this would be vegetation measurements, soil profiles, down and dead woody debris, any herbaceous vegetation, just to get a good indication of what was on site there before the burn. And then again, they would visit within 2 months after the burn and then do a follow-up survey. And the photo that is shown here shows the same shot before and after the fire has occurred, taken from the same vantage point. And then they would go through the same and then measure the amount of remaining vegetation, the composition of what's left there, and then we have a sort of a before and after data set to gauge for the objectives of the burn. Objectives in prescribed fire, we have about 5 or 4 objectives that we generally would try to achieve. The first one is capping units, and a capping unit by definition is a burn that's set as a roadblock, as it were, to the passage of fire. These are generally placed in mountain passes, where in the R11 unit we have several mountain ranges that create effective barriers, but there are breaks in those barriers, and the capping unit would be a fire strategically placed to prevent the fire from inside from getting past it and going out into the forest at large, or the industrial forest management agreement forest on the other side there. The end of this is that allows us to entertain the notion of fire use, where, again, as I mentioned, natural fires could be allowed to burn unrestrained, essentially. Another excellent opportunity for prescribed fire is ecological restoration. And in a nutshell, this is just putting a fire footprint back on the landscape and taking that over-mature or mature forest back to year zero and letting that new grassland and shrub forest type take over and giving a whole ecological niche that wasn't there before. Because of the pine makeup, the extensive pine makeup that we have in the R11 unit and the age class of it, it is right at the preferred stand condition for the mountain pine beetle. And one of the mandates of the plan was to try and reduce high susceptibility mountain pine beetle stands and to increase wildlife habitat. R11 is a recreational playground for much of Alberta. There's hunting permitted in there, there's a lot of hunting pressure, and the mandate to maintain or increase habitat, not just for hunters but for the populations at large, was one of the core elements of the plan, and it's also one of the objectives that we try to achieve. So moving into our prescribed fire program, one of our first fires in the R11 unit happened in 2007. And this was a capping unit, about 127 hectares, a photo taken by Bruce McGregor. And then just 4 days later, also taken by Bruce, was this photo. And this is a photo that is the most characteristic of the Smoky Bear fire prevention message, the black, the destruction. However, I'd also say that this is also the most transitory and state of a forest fire that changes the quickest, because in a matter of weeks, this is sprouting back to green grass and new vegetation, because what's happened is the flush of nutrient release from the fire, the warming soil, the removal of overstory and competition. And it's just like turning over your garden in the spring. It just comes back. And case in point, 2 years later, again from the same vantage point, all the black is gone. The old tree stems are there, but that mature forested stand is now a mix of trees and grassland, and the elk and the sheep are not long in making use of that. Another burn that occurred in 2009 was the North Saskatchewan prescribed burn, quite a bit larger. This one was in excess of 5,000 hectares. Interesting on this burn was adjacency to Highway 11, which was kept open throughout the duration of the burn, and the size of the burn. Any burns are often controversial. This burn met its controversy in whitebark pine and in some dendrochronology opportunities, but overall is meeting with good success. Follow-up whitebark pine regeneration surveys are showing good regeneration of that endangered species, and plus the provision of a lot of new habitat for expansion of whitebark pine, which wasn't there before, with the mature subalpine fir and lodgepole pine. 2011 saw the Hat Mountain prescribed burn, which had a number of cracks at it from 2007, and finally in 2011 we were able to achieve it with the right conditions. And about 450 hectares that were able to burn. And the big success on this one was its adjacency to the Yaha-Tinda and the hunting mecca, the popularity of hunting that the Yaha-Tinda Ranch represents, to be able to do this burn. And I think it really showed to the hunting audience down there, the public there, that we're in there for a couple days. There's 1 or 2 days of intense disturbance, and then other than some smoke lingering in the valley, it's a very short-lived event. This was our last burn in the spring and May of 2013, and notable on this burn, which, if you're familiar with the countryside, is across from 40 Mile Cabin in the Clearwater River Valley. This is another capping unit. The intent is to burn off the hillside that's shown, and as the fire progressed, using aerial ignition, the fire was eventually brought right down to the bottom of the mountain, and a very successful burn. And this burn is notable in that it occurred at the same time that the Nordegg fire was going on. So in one location, the province is desperately fighting the fire, trying to save the community, and miles away we're setting the forest on fire deliberately in fire management. So kind of a contradiction in terms in some regards, but when the fire is ready to burn, it's ready to burn, or the land is ready to burn, so we have to go with these initiatives. Some future uses of prescribed fire. We're looking at engaging fire as a silviculture. This was a study done with the prescribed burn program in the city in putting fire on cut blocks and engaging regeneration response. And the history of our prescribed burn in the province is we've had 4 successful prescribed burns. We've achieved about over 6,500 hectares so far. We have about 5 more capping units, and the target is between this year and next year to finish them. We're working very hard at building partnerships and public acceptance. We really live and die on public opinion there, and it's very important to create good relationships. We like to, because we know that we're going to have a fire in a certain location, we can really open the door to fire research. And the intent is to build the opportunity for not just prescribed fires that we put on the landscape, but also for the occurrence of natural fire in prescribed fire use, and to start turning back from the full suppression response to one of a more natural environment where fire could be in a position where it could reside on the landscape. The one closing message here is R11 is really like a pilot project, and I'm addressing an audience of private forestry industry professionals and some government professionals, and if R11 just stays as a pilot project, then we failed. Prescribed fire use and fire use is a real management tool, and it has application for just about everybody in the room, whether you're on the private industry side or the government side. Moving forward from some of the recommendations from the 2011 Flat Top Review, the province has instituted wildland fire management specialists in every area, and it's their mandate to integrate fire into forest management. If you were involved in any capacity, or if you saw anything that kind of made the light click on where you could apply for fire use, you can approach myself or your local forest office and talk to these individuals. I would say that prescribed fire is a tool for you to consider in your toolbox, not just something that forestry is doing out in the backcountry away from the mainstream of forestry. And I'll take any questions, please. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, David. I'm a little short here. Our next presenters are Mike Undershore.